Friday, April 26th. I'm the chairman of the committee, Mitchell Englander. We are waiting for some of my colleagues to arrive. There were some other events going on this morning as well. They're en route. With that, though, we are going to go ahead and move some items on consent. Now, since we don't have a quorum, let me remind you of the Brown Act and the rules. If you have conversations first, please. It's a very difficult room to hear, and as well, if you could be so kind as to take your conversations into the hall or keep them to a whisper, we would all, or I would appreciate it. With that, since we don't have a quorum yet, we can't actually officially take public comment yet. When we do have a quorum, we now have a quorum. So Mr. Zine, Mr. Buscaino are here. We now have a quorum, and we're going to go ahead and go into general public comment first and open it up for general public comment. I don't have any general public comment cards, so seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. We do have comment cards on specific items, which we will hear on those items. The speakers will be contained to 2 minutes as per the rules of the committee, and we'll try to run through this efficiently and effectively in making sure that everybody has a voice that's here. With that, we've got a few items that I will propose on consent. We have a comment card, though, on 1 and a comment card on 2. There's no comment cards on 3, and we have a comment card on 11. 1, 2, and 11 are all the same individual, Mr. Arnold Sachs. Is Mr. Sachs here? Okay. So I think what we'll go ahead and do, Mr. Sachs, is we'll go ahead and we're going to hold those on the table till the end of the committee so we can ensure you have an opportunity to speak, so we can go through some of these other items. If you wish to continue to hold that position, we'll be happy to oblige. And then so with that, it's the only one without a comment card on those items for consent would be item 2. No, we've got one on 2 as well. Item 3. So we'll go ahead and move 3 on consent unless my colleagues have any questions on items 3. That is on the police composite artist contract. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move that item on consent and approve. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir.
And with that, then, if we can go ahead and take item 4 next.
Item 4, motion Koretz Englander requesting that the City Attorney, LAPD, and the Chief Legislative Analyst report relative to false 911 calls made by individuals claiming that a robbery, hostage situation, or other serious crime is occurring, also known as swatting.
Feel free to have a seat at the table.
Thank you.
Before we open it up for any discussion, let me remind you that under this motion, it's really an idea of collecting the dollars that we're expending on swatting. It's the incidents, and we'll have the Los Angeles Police Department explain exactly what swatting means under their definition. But the idea is to strengthen our ordinances, the ability perhaps to add a reward, but it's not about discussing any tactics at all or who's deployed under swatting. That's proprietary public safety information. We don't want to release or share that information. Those are deployment efforts, and as a matter of public safety, that's proprietary information that we won't speak to publicly. If it's critically important that we have to go into any of that in the future, we'll have to adjourn into a closed session meeting and schedule it accordingly. But with that, if we could please go ahead and open it up.
Hi, my name is David Hirsch, and I'm Councilmember Koretz's Legislative Director. The Councilman asked me to make a short statement on his behalf in support of the swatting motion you are currently considering. Recently, a plethora of swatting incidences have occurred in the city. Swatting refers to false 911 calls being made by individuals claiming that a robbery, hostage situation, or other serious crime is occurring in order to draw a strong police presence to the home of the alleged victim. Swatting perpetrators use sophisticated means to obscure their identities while at the same time seeking attention and notoriety. SWAT teams have been called to the homes of various celebrities based on these prank calls to 911 that report a violent crime in progress. These swatting incidences pose a threat to public safety, not only because they tie up much-needed LAPD resources, but also because officers responding to these fake incidences have been injured. While legislation has been introduced in the state legislature, which Councilman Englander has sought city support for, to increase the penalties of swatting, it's important that the city council support our police department to address this problem. Councilman Koretz has introduced this motion to, 1, ask the LAPD to suggest ways the city council can assist in combating these crimes committed by pranksters. 2, ask the city attorney to draft an ordinance requiring that perpetrators of these swatting incidences pay restitution to the LAPD for all costs incurred responding to these false alarm incidents. And 3, to ask the city attorney about the feasibility of a second ordinance authorizing a reward to anyone who provides information leading to the arrest and conviction of swatting perpetrators. I've asked Wayne Billowit, the Sheriff's Department's Sacramento legislative advocate, to be here today. The Sheriff's Office has sponsored 2 bills in the legislature regarding swatting, and Mr. Billowit has some ideas for working those bills as to how we can possibly strengthen the council's response to swatting.
Thank you very much. Sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant Wayne Billowit on behalf of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. As was said, we are sponsoring one bill in particular. It's Senate Bill 333, which would deal with amending Penal Code Section 148.3 to include the ability for the city to recoup its costs for any public safety, not just police, but fire and hazmat or any other type of emergency response. Assembly Bill 47, a Mike Gatto bill, we are a strong supporter of. We're not the sponsor of, but we're a strong supporter of. That would increase the number of different penalties involving in swatting, but also would allow for the city to recoup its costs for any type of public safety costs attached. I'm here to fully support the motion by Mr. Koretz. These will all work in tandem very well together. You never know what's going to happen in Sacramento as to whether these bills get out or not, but it's good for the city to have a good, solid backup plan that incorporates the best of these 2 bills into the city's plan. So we strongly urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. In fact, I've authored, as the chair of the committee, a resolution to support the legislative bills as well.
Fantastic.
So
Thank you, sir.
Morning.
Morning, sir. I'm Commander John Sherman from Operations Central Bureau, and I'm representing the Office of Operations this morning with the LAPD. And we are certainly supportive of any effort to enhance a penalty or enhance restitution that the city attorney or the city council finds appropriate. We have a working group within the LAPD that's looking at the issue of 911 abuse and its impact on both us as well as the community, trying to find a number of ways to minimize its impact as much as possible. And we are doing that. We're undertaking a number of approaches, from our dispatch review and our dispatch policy to our response by the tacticians in the field, as well as the investigative side about how we attempt to prosecute, and then the media side, and that's kind of the most significant. And you may have noticed about 8-9 days ago, the department changed its posture on what we're going to say relative to these, because it's our belief that one of the most significant aspects of why people do this is because they like the notoriety of it being out in the media and so on. So we're doing as much as we can to minimize that on the front end at the instance that it goes down, and then any follow-up releases that occur through our PIO is going to occur at a much more infrequent rate and likely through the process of discovery.
Excellent. Thank you very much. In fact, it's one of the very few times where I support the city or any department holding information back from the public or the media. It's one of those rare circumstances that sort of fits the mold of why it's in the best interest not to share the information, because I believe you're right, and I support the chief's efforts in the idea, and I believe the sheriff's department is doing the same, and applaud Liebach's leadership that's why they're doing it, is so they can watch it unfold on the news, and somebody eventually, at some point in time, will get seriously hurt or killed. There's no question. What happened recently with the legislator who's carrying the bill in Sacramento, Mr. Liu, his own swatting incident at his house, is just unbelievable that something like that would happen. I mean, that went even beyond swatting to the type of the incident that they reported at the home and what they accused them of. I mean, it's just gotten out of control. So absolutely support legislation moving forward. I appreciate Mr. Koretz's work and leadership on this as well. I'd like to offer one amendment, if I could, and that would be that we ensure that the costs include, if we're going to add a reward, that if we pay out a reward, that becomes part of the cost and the capture in the city's and the taxpayers' funds, that individual would be responsible for paying back on top of the costs for all city services deployed under that effort.
Second.
Colleagues,
That's fine.
any questions,
Yeah.
comments?
Couple of
Mr.
questions. How widespread is the swatting situation? I know we've heard it in Los Angeles, mainly celebrities. Statewide, how wide is it? And is it a national trend or just certain areas of this particular jurisdiction?
Mr. Zine, your jurisdiction is getting hit the hardest, but nationwide, from what I understand, there's been about 400 swatting incidents nationwide over the last couple of years. But clearly, the city of Los Angeles is getting hit the hardest, and the men and women of Los Angeles Police Department are doing the bulk of the work on these things.
And is it normally celebrities where it's targeted for the swatting call?
As far as I know, yes. And of course, Senator Lieu was swatted just this week, and he's the sponsor. He's the author of Senate Bill 333. So
And that seemed to be based on retaliation because of what it's trying to do to protect
it appears.
the public.
Yes, sir.
And the Sheriff's Department, have they worked with the other jurisdictions in the county to try and come up with some kind of a game plan, or every department separate in their
Well, we've
operation?
been working with the LAPD and with Beverly Hills Police Department, which has also gotten a large number of these calls as well. And we're trying to coordinate, but the tough part is trying to figure out exactly who done it. But we're working on it.
I understand there was one youngster in another country that was responsible for some of the activities that was reported in the media.
I know this is an international problem. I'm unaware of a youngster from another country that was.
I understand he put the call in, he was in another country, at least the report that I read is that he was in another country outside the United States, put in a call, and somehow was monitoring the call, which goes to the extremes that they want to do. Obviously, it's a great bill. Obviously, it's a problem that we have to capture and to eliminate for all of the issues that are when the SWAT goes out, the officers, the deployment, et cetera. So got my wholehearted support on it, and thanks to the officers of the departments that are responding to these and trying to figure out what the situation actually is, if it's actually a situation that requires police response, or if it's what we call the swatting call, which is a situation that wastes a lot of resources and personnel time.
Great. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Zine. Mr. Buscaino.
I just want to commend the partnership between the two agencies, the Sheriff's Department and Los Angeles Police Department. And I think ultimately we need to send a clear message to these knuckleheads making these false 911 calls that enough is enough. You make these calls, LAPD officers, blowing, 911 calls, lights and sirens, putting everyone at risk. And so my understanding, Mitch, is in addition, you want to add punitive damages once these knuckleheads are arrested?
No, not punitive. We don't have the authority to do that. But if we're going to add a reward function, where we do in the case of other open type cases, where we can put out, for example, a $25,000 reward that would result in the apprehension and conviction of one of these perpetrators of swatting. If we can find that suspect, and then that cost, that $25,000 reward or whatever dollar amount that might be, should be added to the actual cost of the swatting incident or incidents that person's responsible for paying back.
Do we have a price tag on how much this is costing us every time we wheel out to these calls?
No, we don't have a price tag. Every incident is different, and every incident requires a different response.
So each one will be measured individually and captured in terms of there could be additional black and whites in addition to a SWAT team. There could be, depending on the type of call that comes out, RA units rolled, if it's shots fired type thing. It just depends on the nature of each incident. So the departments will capture all that detail. so we can go after once we find that individual responsible.
I like to add that to add punitive damages once knuckleheads is caught.
Yeah, we don't have an ability as a city to do that, but we do have the
Do we have-
ability to recapture the costs.
Right.
And so my amendment was simply to say, if we're going to be adding a reward function to this, which would, by the way, each reward would have to be a resolution by a council member, approved by council, signed by the mayor, and if that's done and we follow the process,
Okay.
as we do with other types of incidents, then that cost also be added to
Got it.
the overall cost of the totality of what the city is expended on that particular incident. Okay, so that'll be the action of this committee, and thank you very much. We actually, before we take a vote, we can't take a vote yet. We do have one comment card on item 4, Mr. Sachs. Okay.
Well, yes, thank you very much. I do appreciate the fact that you're looking to capture the costs that are involved in this situation. But my concern here, and actually I should have put this in on public comment, but since it was mentioned, is the reward procedure. Because you had a big stink about a reward.
That's not what was agendized, but if you want to speak
It was
to the...
mentioned in the discussion, and that's why I put the card in, because I should have actually put it in the public comment. But since it was mentioned as part of this discussion, the reward procedure and the fact that there is no real procedure, and it should be addressed based on the situation that occurred with the tragedy with the rogue LAPD officer, and now you're in a discussion about who gets rewarded and how gets... Suppose somebody turns somebody in and you say the reward is available upon conviction, but suppose the person who made the call decides they want to commit suicide and they kill themselves. So the person turns them in to report them, but the person ends up dead. Does that mean the reward's not given because he wasn't convicted of the crime? So you need to look at addressing your parameters about how you're giving out rewards and discuss that before you start throwing rewards out again, only based on this past procedure. That's my point. But again, I appreciate the fact that you're looking to control the cost, and the fact that you could put out a reward. If you put out a reward for $25,000 and you want to incur punitive damages, I think the fact that you're putting out a reward for $25,000 and have the ability to collect that as part of your costs of the overall operation, that's a pretty good punitive damage right there to start. I don't necessarily think you want to piggyback on top of that. But just the idea that you set up some standards for giving out the rewards, because you want the people to contribute, and if they get turned away, people will say, why bother?
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so the action of this committee will approve that with that amendment, and we'll go ahead and send that on to council. Do we have an idea of when that will be scheduled?
As soon as will be next Friday, May the 3rd, or the following week.
Please, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, we'll go ahead and, on consent, take item 2. There are no speaker cards on 2. We'll move that on consent. With one question to EMD, as it relates overall, on the next scheduled Public Safety Committee, we will ask for, as relates to this, there are no cards on 2. Oh, we do, 2 and 11, you're right. We'll go ahead and hold those again till the end of the meeting then.
You're going to hold 2?
Yeah, we'll hold that till the end of the meeting. We'll come back to those. We have 1, 2, and 11. So 3, and we moved 3 already. Okay, so the next item we'll go ahead and take is item 5.
Item 5, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to enacting an ordinance to require all BB...
There are no speaker cards, so public comment is closed on item 5. We'll go ahead and open it up for item 5. Thank you.
BB and pellet-firing air guns sold in the city of Los Angeles to be bright colors so as to differentiate them from firearms, pursuant to Senate Bill 1315, as initiated by motion, Zine, Koretz, Garcetti, Smith.
Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, members of the committee. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name's Bill Hart. I'm the commanding officer, Gang and Narcotics Division. I also have with me Lieutenant Mike Opelt, who's the officer in charge of the gang support section, and Detective Rick Tompkins, who's the officer in charge of our gun unit. And we are here this morning to ask you to approve the Board of Police Commissioners' report relative to the proposed imitation firearms ordinance. This topic came to the forefront after a tragedy that occurred a couple of years ago where a young man was shot by an LAPD officer. He subsequently was paralyzed. He was holding a gun an airsoft pistol that was indistinguishable from an actual firearm. And this became a very important subject for the Chief of Police. He asked the gun unit to work with the City Attorney's Office to draft an ordinance that would ban the sale, possession, or manufacture of these imitation firearms in the City of Los Angeles unless they were brightly colored or made in some manner that would make them easily distinguishable from an actual firearm. So we have been doing that. We worked with the City Attorney's Office, and we have some proposed language that we would like the committee to direct the City Attorney to put in the form of an ordinance.
Excellent, thank you very much. Gentlemen, did you have anything to add, or should we just open it up for questions? Yeah. Here for support?
No, sir.
Okay. With that, are you proposing different violations? Is there a different structure depending on sale versus manufacture versus possession? Or is it all going to be wrapped up into one?
We're working with the city attorney right now. It'll probably be wrapped up into one.
Into one? And this would be a misdemeanor?
Yes.
Okay. And are we talking about, when we talk about imitation guns, are we talking about toy versus airsoft versus what can actually fire versus BB? Is it all
Wrapped in together, sir. Imitation firearm or BB device, any gun that looks like the real McCoy that you cannot distinguish between a real gun and a toy gun or a BB gun, those will be the ones that we're targeting.
And are we suggesting that it's simply orange tipped or orange gripped or the entire?
We're going for the whole surface, sir.
The whole surface?
Almost the majority of the surface. I think we wrote it up very typical to what's in the penal code right now under a different section, but the majority of the gun is all bright orange, bright red, bright pink.
What about other types of BB guns that it says BB? Is it BB or pellet?
It's for the state purposes and the city purpose. BB device is airsoft or traditional metal BB. So it'll include everything.
Okay. And with that, are there other cities or counties that we're aware of that have any similar ordinance out there?
Other states, I believe New York has it, and there's two other states in the middle of the country. I can't remember what they were, but for the state of California, it'll be the city of LA. And we also got the authority for the county of LA to do it also, so hopefully they'll follow suit.
The movers of this original motion, it was presented by Mr. Zine, Mr. Koretz, and Mr. Garcetti, and seconded by Mr. Smith at the time. So if we could, Mr. Zine, you have questions, ideas, concerns? You'd like to...
It's been a time in coming to this. We introduced this June of 2011. I'm glad we've got some movement going forward on it. The question, is there any, on a national level, we talk about all this issue with weapons, is there anything on a national level to do something like this, since someone could take a weapon, facsimile or whatever, from another jurisdiction and bring it into a city or the county? Is there anything on a national level to go towards what we're looking for in this?
No, sir. Again, it hasn't been touched in a long time by state agencies or local agencies. Federal law has very few rules and guidelines on airsoft or BB guns. We had a big battle with the state of California back in 2011 trying to pass this as a state law. It took us all of 2012 to get the authority to have the city be able to weigh in on this, and so we are leading. We'll be on the forefront on this for the most part.
I would hope that we could extend it out not only to LA City or LA County, but to that jurisdiction. The two tragedies that did occur may not have occurred if this was in place. Absolutely. The officers would have recognized the fact that different types of weapons. One was a gun that could obviously kill, and the other one was not. So with that, I thank you for the movement on it, and hopefully we can take this, implement on a local, county, and then hopefully take it throughout the country. I think it's something that really merits some additional enforcement, additional emphasis, additional cooperation, and my sympathy for the officers who are involved in these tragic situations, because I'm sure it bothers them that these tragedies occurred, and it could have been prevented, and what they have to go through, and then the families of those who were obviously shot in the situations.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Joe? Okay.
Moving forward.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move this item forward on to council.
As approval?
As approved. Thank you very much. Have one last question on this. Has there been any discussion or a timeline for implementation on the current stores that have inventory or what they would do? A lot of the sporting stores and local
No, sir.
sporting goods
Yeah,
stores?
We'll be discussing that with the city attorney probably in the next week or so to figure out exactly what direction we want to go with.
Because
on
there's
the timing.
certainly a lot of sporting goods stores and others that, have a lot of these in stock, and hate for them to be stuck with them and trying to figure out what to do, if there's modifications that can be done,
Yes.
relatively inexpensive. So if that research could be done before it comes on to council, but if we could hold this, we'll go ahead and send it on to council, but hold it for 60 days before it's scheduled for council so we can iron out some of those details. Would
Absolutely,
be
sir.
very helpful, because I think those are critically important. And it'll take a little more work to make sure we're crossing our Ts on those things. Great.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
We might
with
be
that,
up here for the next one.
here for the next one as well? All right. We're going to go ahead and take, actually, if we could, the next ones are going to take some conversation, so I'm going to go ahead and come back to 6 and 7 in a moment. 8, we'll go ahead and, unless there's any comments on item 8, we'll go ahead and approve item 8 for a report. 8, we do have a...
2.
We do have, Labange is here for 8. Okay. We're going to go ahead and take item 8 up next. If you can read item 8 into the record.
Yes, sir. Item 8, motion Labange Koretz instructing LAPD with the assistance of the Planning Department and the Department of Building Safety and in consultation with the city attorney to report relative to regulating party houses.
Okay. And also, we're only going to go to 1-minute public comment on this particular item because there's no actual written report, and it'll be most likely the direction of this committee to instruct and request a written report back. But with that, we do have another council member in our presence. So, Mr. Labange.
We do have a great constituent in our presence.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien.
Yes. And we do have a speaker card for Ms. O'Brien as well. Would you like to speak first, please?
Many events, party houses generate commerce by compromising R1 zoning, safety, property values, and quality of life for others. In some cases, short-term hotel rentals coincide with party event rentals. The negative issues of both uses are similar, boiling down to safety. Relative to narrow streets, we don't have sidewalks, and our average street width is 18 feet wide and very curvy. Cigarette smoke, fireworks, people loitering in the street, drug use, fights are all problems. Quality of life and property values also come into play, especially noise, since most houses have amplified music. We've worked with Captain Hayakawa in the Hollywood division, and he's been very responsive, but it only goes so far. We need legislation that has really good enforcement, and that probably means a really heavy fining situation. I have a list of houses and some documents for you as well.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, and thank you for coming this morning. We appreciate it. Mr. Labange.
You have them in your districts?
Yes.
I know the police department will tell you it's an extreme challenge. Sometimes your party houses is one of the toughest things. I know officers have had very tough, I know 2 officers in the last 10 years lost their lives going to party house calls to the challenge that sometimes happens. But I think there's a way. Let's study it. And also, even if we pass the house that night, let's say you're having a party, and we note that there's certain violations, parking, hydrants, noise, after 11 o'clock at night, because I think curfew, which is 10, is a different time now. Then we just send a notice like you get as if you're in a commercial building when you don't have your trash cans put away or your dumpster clear, and then there's a fine to that. I think there's an administrator we could do that. The toughest, or the greatest thing we could help to the police department enforcement is the arm that is able to, with the code, the administrative code or the municipal code, get enforcement and give a stiff fine to those who violate what the codes are. I thank the Public Safety Committee. I'm on my way.
Thank you, Councilman, for coming here this morning and presenting this. This is a significant problem. I appreciate it. We have one more speaker card. Mr. Sachs, for 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. Good morning again, Arnold Sachs. Here's the problem I see. You know, you look at controlling swatting. So these commercial events, suppose Budweiser wants to rent a party, throw a party. They're going to go through it, and you see it every day in council, and you see it every day in all the things that come up. They'll have a license liability committee, a company with a DBA of somebody else and something else and something else, and the person who will be responsible would be who? Who will end up bearing the cost? Some poor nut who they recruit to put up flyers, maybe. I don't know. But you need to be able to strengthen it so that if it's a corporate party, then the corporation suffers the brunt of the injustice, because otherwise they're home free. It's the same situation where you have different rules, but you're not willing to step up and enforce them.
Thank you, Mr. Sachs.
Mr. Chair, just
Yes.
Hollywood City Hall.
Yes.
We'd like to have just a hearing on this. I'll organize it for you. We'd like people to be better testimony as we develop the study. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bond. Okay, so that'll be the action of this committee, is we'll go ahead and approve this, but ask for that report from the departments to come back to this committee within 60 days.
Okay. We're going to hold it in committee until the report?
We'll hold it in committee for the actual written report
Okay.
and their recommendations as well.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Labange. It's an issue we all deal with in all of our communities, there's no question, so really appreciate that. We'll take item 9 and 10 next.
Items 9 and 10. 9, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the status of LAPD's processing of DNA evidence kits for the month of January 2013, and a report from the Commission relative to the status of LAPD's processing of DNA evidence kits for the months of November and December 2012, and for the period October through December 2012.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Yvette Burney. I'm the Commanding Officer of Scientific Investigation Division for LAPD, and I'm here on items 9 and 10. I'd like to point out that you have about 4 months' worth of stats in front of you, and if you look at the October stats and compare them to the January stats, you will see some remarkable things. For one, we are now doing the vast majority of these DNA cases in-house, which is what the council had asked us to do. The other thing you'll notice, if you look at the December stats and compare them to the January stats, in December we were able to start using our high-throughput male DNA program. It's a batching system that allows us to have high efficiency. And if you look at the stats from December to January, you will see that we have significant drops in the turnaround time. So in December, we had cases over 90 days at the rate of about 52, I believe it was. Let me look. December.
Oh, I was looking at 90.
We had 40. And it's going down each month. Now, you're going to get some reports in the next few months. Our March report, which has not gone through the commission yet, shows we have no reports over 90 days. So we are getting better and better.
None.
We are
You have none
thrilled.
over 90?
We have none over 90 days now. the current stats.
Wow.
And
That's fantastic.
it's, as we roll this out and tweak it and create efficiencies with it, we're seeing our turnaround time closer to about 8 weeks right now.
Fantastic.
So we're getting better and better, and I have to say thank you to the council for giving us the resources over the years to get rid of the backlog in the first place through outsourcing.
Well, thank you
But
very
then
much.
also beefing up our internal staff so we could do it in-house.
Yeah,
It's
but
working.
you guys have actually stepped up to do it, and this is critically important. I mean, if public safety is the most important thing in the city and the core function and the cornerstone of what we do as a local government, one of the worst crimes ever committed or can ever be committed is one of a sexual nature. And the DNA kits and the backlog was certainly a horrific, eye-opening shock when we found out that we had this tremendous backlog. And we need that information to solve these cases, to prosecute these cases. But you guys have really done a lot more, quite frankly. We haven't fully funded what you needed, but you did it anyway. And so now we have no cases at all over 90 days, and that's remarkable. So the department needs to be applauded, and particularly under the leadership of Mr. Albanese as well, who I know is in the room, doing a great job. Terrific officer. With that, if I could, colleagues, why don't we, there's a lot of work, I'm assuming, to put these reports together, although you're tracking them regularly, but just to come to committee, has been instructed to ensure that we had the transparent reports, and they were all shared publicly and with this body as well on a regular basis. I'd like to amend it now that we've come up and managed that backlog and no longer have a backlog, which is incredible, that the LAPD report to council at any time there exists a number of sexual assault evidence kits in the analysis process longer than 90 days when that number equals 5% or greater than the total number of outstanding evidence kits in the analysis process. And that way we have a trigger point, colleagues. At any point we hit that threshold, automatically it will be scheduled for committee and council to report on where we're at, what happened, what's going on, and it'll be the department's responsibility to ensure that any time, if at ever, and hopefully that never happens again, and we don't create a backlog because of the lack of funding. And quite frankly, I put the responsibility not so much on the department, but on the budgetary mess and crises we've gone in through. But reprioritizing this was critically important for the council, for the mayor, and for the department. So I appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into this. But we have an automatic trigger that it comes back here if necessary, if it hits those thresholds, which are minimum thresholds. And so if you guys are okay with that, unless there's any concern or question on that.
Mr. Chairman, just so I understand, so that so long as 95% or more of the tests are processed within 90 days, there's no need to report back. It's only if that threshold goes above the 5%. I think that makes sense to alleviate additional burden on the department. And I just want to piggyback on your comments and mention what an extraordinary success this has been and how much of a declaration of victory over a big problem I think the department can take credit for, because it's a horrible situation when a victim of sexual assault has to go through the additional discomfort and embarrassment and sometimes humiliation of providing evidence for an evidence kit, and then further have to go through the experience of knowing that that evidence kit was just sitting on a shelf and not being considered and used to chase down his or her perpetrator. And so I think that the progress that we've made in this is remarkable, and I want to really congratulate the department for this victory. And I think your amendment makes a great deal of sense, Mr. Chairman, in order to save resources that can be better used elsewhere.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so that'll be the action of this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take items 6 and 7 next. We do have one comment card. And again, we'll go ahead and take that first. Mr. Arnold Sachs. Items 6 and 7 together.
Item 6, City Attorney Report and Ordinance amending or adding Article 6.7 to Chapter 4 of the LAMC to prohibit large-capacity ammunition magazines within the City of LA, as initiated by motion, Krikorian, Vizcaino, Englander, Koretz. Item 7, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to requiring all vendors selling or otherwise transferring the ownership of any firearm ammunition to any person to compile and transmit an electronic record of all such transactions to LAPD, as initiated by motion, Krikorian, Vizcaino, Englander, Garcetti, Labange.
Yes, thank you again. Good morning, Arnold Sachs. I appreciate this, and I don't remember what committee it was, Mr. Krikorian, but I remember we had a hearing here, and there were some people here who were talking about if you try to legislate gun control, and I came up here and made a public comment regarding this exact thing, and I'm not looking, and I mentioned they talk about the Second Amendment with the right to bear arms, but nowhere in the Second Amendment does it mention anything to the right to bear a magazine with 30 bullets in it. So this is well thought out. I mean, but it also addresses the problem with the national problem, because while Congress and the ridiculousness that everybody, you had 15,000 tons of weight on one side against for some kind of gun control, and 2 ounces on the other side, and the 2 ounces seem to win. Why don't they look at this kind of legislature instead of trying to control the guns and try to control the ammunition? It's a simple point. If you want to go back and look at the Second Amendment and you want to carry a gun, carry a musket that's a muzzle load.
All right. So moving on with that, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Krikorian as the mover of both of these items.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sachs, for those comments. You're right. We did hear this matter here in this committee before. The city attorney has prepared an ordinance now pursuant to the instructions that this committee provided at that hearing. And in a nutshell, this ordinance confirms the city's prerogative as provided specifically by state statute, recognizing that local government can designate high-capacity magazines, large-capacity magazines, as a public nuisance. That's essentially what this ordinance does. There are a few things that I might want to continue to work with the city attorney on and polishing by the time it gets to council, but I'm perfectly in support of the ordinance as it's drafted. One of the suggestions that I would have, and I leave it to the discretion of the committee as to whether this should be part of the committee report or a discussion that we can have in council. But I would like to add to the declaration of nuisance a misdemeanor penalty for continued possession of large capacity magazines after a date certain in the future, say a year from now, so that once the city makes this very clear statement about the dangerous nature of these magazines, anyone who continues to be in possession after, say, 1 year from the effective date of the ordinance would then be subject to misdemeanor penalties. So that's something that the city attorney has not included in this draft ordinance. I would like it to be a part of the city's law. We can either include that within the report now, or I can provide an amendment at the time of council.
I would be fine with accepting that as an amendment to come back to council with that in the ordinance. I would also add and look at redefining with careful consideration on some of the exemptions that are being proposed in the ordinance as well, to ensure that we capture those in law enforcement, those with CCWs, because many of those are law enforcement or judges, and the other ones that the state recognizes, just to parallel what the state's doing, as well as some method or mechanism to pick up or drop off the large capacity magazines with to law enforcement in that time period before it hits that, whether it's a 1 year or 18-month trigger point.
Before misdemeanor.
Before misdemeanor.
In addition, we may want to consider, and I would welcome having a safe haven or window of opportunity of a much shorter duration, say 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, something like that, in which the provisions of the nuisance seizures would be forestalled as well. The effective date of this might be postponed for 60 days to allow people disposition of these or surrender of these magazines that they may have in their possession prior to declaration of nuisance. And I'd be fine with including that as well, and I think the city attorney would be prepared to include language like that by the time we get to council. As far as the exemption...
Just for the record, for those who are not in the room listening in on the information, we've got both city attorneys in the back of the room nodding their head yes, so that'll be a declaration of...
And with regard to the exemptions, Mr. Chair, you're certainly right.
Yeah.
And for the sake of the record, it is not the intention of this ordinance to capture any large capacity magazines that would not be addressed by state law with regard to sale and transfer. So entertainment industry, law enforcement, and all the other exemptions that are already included in state law would be encompassed within this nuisance statute as well.
Excellent.
I just want to commend Mr. Krikorian taking this action and moving forward on it. You know, and today you hear in social media, Facebook posts on this specific item. You know, I challenge anyone who questions this moving forward to go to a crime scene where you see multiple rounds of a gang-related shooting of a 14-year-old that I can testify that I responded to on 6th Street in San Pedro. Multiple rounds, this kid did not have a chance. And I was tasked with following this kid to the hospital. Code 3 lights and sirens to UCLA Medical Center. Ending up knowing that this 14-year-old kid was once in my wife's 6th grade class. You know, we can debate all we want here, but we need to do something. Enough is enough. And I want to thank my colleagues who are moving forward, but we need to do the right thing here and move forward.
Appreciate that, Mr. Biscayne. Mr. Zine?
I just want to add my comments to it. It's reasonable. You're looking at a semi-automatic weapon. 10 rounds is enough to protect your business, your family. You don't need to have 30 rounds or 40 rounds. Law enforcement, military, obviously, they need for certain situations, but the average person can still protect themselves and their family clearly with 10 rounds in a semi-automatic weapon. So I commend Mr. Krikorian, Mr. Busquiano, Mr. Engler, and Koretz for bringing this forward. And I know that the national level, they're looking at this issue, the state level, but we need to do something in the city of Los Angeles because obviously we have too many tragedies. While our murder rate has reduced from over 1,000, less than 300, we can do better, and this is an effort in that manner to help reduce those numbers. Again, it does not take away the right to protect yourself and your family. 10 rounds in a semi-automatic is more than sufficient to protect you and your family. You don't need to have multiple round magazines for that purpose. So thank you, and strongly support this measure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And to close as a chair on this item, you know, we've seen enough with North Hollywood with the shootout. We've seen enough in Columbine, Virginia Tech, Colorado, Sandy Hook, and right here in our own community, in fact, at the North Valley Jewish Community Center in my district, where on August 10th, 1999, a gunman walked into a daycare center, shot 5 people, and then left that scene and shot a United States postal worker right down the street with large capacity magazines. There's no reason for individuals outside of law enforcement to possess these. There's absolutely no reason. And so I applaud Mr. Krikorian, your efforts and work, and this committee's work. I don't think we could do anything fast enough to remove these from the streets, so I absolutely support the amendments. The stiffest penalties we could put forth possible are critically important, and we'll schedule this for council with those changes and amendments as soon as possible. When can we get this back to council? Working with the city attorney on those changes with that timeline as well. We've got Bill Carter and Mr. Pete Echeverry here. Mr. Carter, did you have a comment?
1 week.
Oh, 1 week?
We could send the request for the modified ordinance to council by next Friday.
Great.
If the city attorney has the ordinance ready on that day, then it'll be up to their office to determine whether council can act on it that day, or if it'll be held over for 1 week for first consideration.
Perfect.
Following week.
Okay, so that will be the order of this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues.
You're also approving item 7, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
We're ready to move forward on item 12. We've got many speaker cards here for item 12 as well. We're going to go ahead and open, we have no other speaker cards for items 12 other than the one that were turned in. If there were any other speakers that wanted to speak on this item, besides the cards we have already been submitted. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close the submission for speaker cards so we can get to this item, and we'll take this up on 2 minutes each. Because of the nature, I'd like to expand the time and give the opportunity to our representative and experts who are going to be speaking. Let me ask the individuals that have filled out the speaker cards collectively, if I could, would you prefer to go to public comment first, or would you like to hear from the department first and then go to public comment after? After. Okay. At least I think you had an opinion there. So we'll go with public comment after we hear from the department. And if we can read the item into the record, John?
Yes, sir. Item 12, Fire Department to present verbal report relative to the reconfiguration of staffing and augmentation of basic life support ambulances.
Morning, Chief.
Good morning, Councilman. Good morning. Councilman of the Public Safety Committee, City Attorney. Hi, John. Doug. Good morning. For presentation today, Mr. Councilman, I'm going to start with Dr. Mark Eckstein, the Medical Director for the Fire Department, to kind of frame the workload issue, the type and frequency of calls that we go on, and then I will brief you on the ambulance reconfiguration and staffing that we're going to be doing. So, Dr. Eckstein.
Good morning.
Morning.
The Los Angeles Fire Department clearly needs more ambulances. Our EMS call loads continue to increase year by year. Hospitals and emergency departments are overcrowded. Our paramedics are not able to unload patients quickly and get back out in the street. And as everybody here is well aware of, we've had challenges meeting response times and therefore potentially compromising patient care throughout the city of Los Angeles. The reality also is that the majority of our calls in EMS in Los Angeles, like most cities in America, actually only require basic life support, not advanced life support. Consequently, when we dispatch, and we have a tiered dispatch system where we try to send the most appropriate resources and the fewest resources to a 911 call, because we have a relative lack of ambulances because they're either already on another call or they're tied up in emergency departments, we have to send fire resources that serve as first responders. All our firefighters are trained as EMTs or paramedics. In order to get a first responder on scene, because there's no ambulances out there in that neighborhood fire station, we often default to sending a fire engine or a light force, which is a truck company plus an engine with it. And as you know, and I'm sure everybody here has heard multiple complaints from their constituents, when they call 911 requesting an ambulance for a medical emergency, they question why all the fire engines and trucks show up in front of their home or in their community. So in an effort to try to alleviate these issues, the proposal is to try to get more ambulances on the street. The current proposal we have from the fire chief would augment our basic life support ambulance fleet by approximately 1/3. This would have a tremendous positive impact on our EMS system throughout Los Angeles, and it really is a domino effect. As I mentioned, the majority of our calls actually only require basic life support, but we don't often know that at the point of dispatch. So if we have enough or additional BLS, basic life support ambulances out there, the computer-aided dispatch system would therefore be able to send an ambulance either alone to handle the call, evaluate the patient, transport the patient to the hospital, or call for paramedics, but it would not as often require the dispatch of a fire engine or light force with the truck companies. The other effect of this is because we'd be able to have additional basic life support ambulances, when it's determined the patient only needs EMT transport to a hospital and not paramedics, the EMT ambulance could handle the call, transport the patient to the hospital, and leave paramedics available for the truly life-threatening critical calls for which they're trained and equipped. So therefore, we have a domino effect. The proposal by augmenting the BLS ambulance fleet would not only free up our paramedic ambulances to enable them to handle the more life-threatening critical calls, but also allow the truck companies and light forces, which are highly specialized to handle structure fires and physical rescues and urban search and rescue and those types of things, more available to respond to fire calls rather than having all this heavy equipment, specialized equipment, and professional firefighters who are highly trained in certain skills tied up on low-level medical calls.
Thank you very much, Doctor. To summarize exactly what it is that we're moving forward with on May 5th, we currently have 11 fire stations in the city of Los Angeles since our staffing reduction that are staffed only with a light force company. That's an aerial ladder truck and a pump apparatus staffed with 6 firefighters, 3 firefighters, an engineer, an apparatus operator, and a captain. Because of the increase in call load in those stations, those are very busy truck companies, and they're tied up most of the time running emergency medical service calls. 85% of what they do is that. So what situation that we have is that those aerial ladder trucks, those light forces, are tied up on those emergency medical service calls, and when a concurrent call comes in, a structure fire, physical rescue, some other type of call, they're not available. So our response time brings a truck from a further away distance. We're going to shift staffing from 22 of those light forces so that I can staff 11 basic life support ambulances, and I'll put those at the light force only stations. Now that ambulance is available in that district to respond to that EMS call load, and it keeps that light force more available to respond to the other calls, including those structure fires and physical rescues. That's the appropriate resource in ambulance responding to those EMS calls. And as Dr. Eckstein pointed out, by increasing that basic life support transport capability, it'll also keep our paramedic ambulances available. Also understand that those BLS ambulances are not just ambulances. They're staffed with firefighter EMTs. So they will respond also to the 15 structure fire calls that we get a day. They'll be responding as staffing to other type calls. But they will be focused on that 85% of what we do that is emergency medical service. 22 of our light forces, 22 of our 42 light forces, the staffing will be reduced from 6 members down to 5. Per Training Bulletin 76, the officers will have, they will take both apparatus, the pump and the aerial ladder truck, to those emergency incidents. But when they get on scene, they will operate either the 5-member truck or a 5-member engine. And that's per NFPA staffing guidelines. So they will be able to operate as a truck company on those scenes. My intention is to closely monitor the data to see exactly how effective this is. The measurements of success will be basic life support, ambulance response times and availability, light force availability and response times, and ALS ambulance availability as well as we improve the system.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we, I think what we'll do is, before we open it up for questions, we go to public comment and we'll come back to you to address some of those. But before we even do that, if we could, and even before I ask any questions on this, there's been a lot of concern out there. Publicly, a lot of questions from the public and the media. There's certainly been a lot of questions from men and women of the department, from their union representatives and their leadership. And we're going to hear from them shortly as well. You've certainly heard, Chief, some of those concerns that have been brought up, both publicly and in Fire Commission, and by some of the fire commissioners. If you could address your response here before we even hear those yet again, unless they're going to, and there are probably some new ones and some unique ones. If you can address those for the committee and your response to some of those concerns. And I know I've heard those from some of my colleagues as well on the council. What's your response to some of those questions that have been brought up?
You're going to hear safety mentioned today. Safety is this department's #1 priority on every dispatch that we go on, every type of call, from the lowest level call that we go on all the way up to a major structure fire. That's our primary concern, and it remains our primary concern. This is a workload issue and a service issue. The public, we respond to over 870 emergency medical service calls per day. We need ambulances out in the field so that we can respond to those, to have the correct resource.
That's the
responding.
85% you're talking about?
85% of our current dispatch call load. As you look at that, last year we responded to 4,500 structure fires. In the next 6 days, I'll respond to 4,500 EMS calls. As you look at the way that we deploy resources, it has to remain dynamic. The work of with your assistance, the work of the IDA task force, we've had the ability to work with some outside vendors, to work with the RAND Corporation, USC, to make sure our data is very clean, and now we have the opportunity to really analyze that data and use it to make deployment decisions. So as we move forward, we need to make sure that our footprint matches the type and frequency of calls that we get in the field. And it's a simple matter of providing the best level of public service to the public. They need ambulances out there. That's what they need to respond. Those basic life support ambulances will keep the paramedic ambulances available, and they'll keep the fire resources, those light forces, available to respond. It's better for me to have that BLS ambulance respond to that EMS call and have a 5-person light force available in their district to respond to a structure fire or a physical rescue in their district than to have a 6-person light force that's tied up on that EMS call, and I have to bring that same company from further away. And we've had unfortunate incidents like that have happened in your district in the last year. So we've recognized an issue, a public service issue, and we're implementing a public service model that allows us to provide the correct resource going to the correct type of incident.
With that, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment, and if you could stick around for a few minutes, I would really appreciate it. I know my colleagues have a lot of questions as well. But before we open it up to public comment, I want to frame it in the context of what's under our authority here as a Public Safety Committee as well. Do we have a city attorney that can address some of the charter items or what we have authority over in terms of this is a deployment and staffing issue, from my understanding, and what we can or can't do to amend or make changes or refer back, or any concerns we want to change that particular idea that's the chief's moving forward with?
Peter Echeverria from the City Attorney's Office. I'm not exactly sure what your question is, and we haven't looked at this issue recently, but I can tell you that generally what the Charter and state law provides is that the chief has control over the allocation of the resources that are provided by the council.
If you're not sure, I want specific clarity on our authority over...
If that's what I'm getting to.
Okay. Yes, please.
Okay.
He's warming up. Yeah, warming up. All right.
The appropriate qualifications and disclaimers that I have not looked at this issue recently, but we have looked at it in the past. And based on that past research, I can tell you that the chief has control over the allocation of the resources that are provided to him. The deployment of those resources is up to the chief, just like the police chief. He determines that deployment, and it's subject to the comments and directions that the commission may wish to express to him.
The commission, the fire commission.
The fire commission.
Not the Public Safety Committee.
Correct. And that, so the charter allocates control of the department in the commission's hands to the extent that they set policy. The actual deployment and implementation of and use of the resources of the department are up to the chief. And so the commission may express their views and provide what they think would be the appropriate policy directions. The chief ultimately makes the decision. Obviously, the chief is appointed by the mayor and can be removed by the mayor, and it's what he does is at the peril
going
of
down
that.
that road. I'm just asking under this particular.
Nevertheless, those are considered. There are practical considerations that are also legal considerations to be taken into account. But the decision as to deployment and the use of the resources is the chief's.
And you said since you didn't look at it from what's being proposed today, it was only past research and knowledge based on previous experience. Has anything changed in the charter since that?
No.
Okay.
It's not.
So it would be relevant to this particular subject matter.
Now, as to the role of the council and of this committee as advising and making recommendations to the full council, the role is one to look at the resources of the department, whether the appropriate resources are being provided and are being used in the manner in which the council intends that they be used,
to provide for public safety. So it's a general, again, overall and policy determination. You are entitled to ask for information and also to express your views as to those resources, and ultimately, again, practically and legally, to cut back on the resources that you provide to the department or to increase them, and to express the views as to how they should be
When you speak of
utilized.
resources, you're speaking about financial resources,
As well as positions,
And positions.
staffing, levels of resource, yes,
but not the actual
All of
deployment. On
Correct.
who responds to what. Okay.
correct.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Clarity on that. We'll go ahead and open it up for public comment, then we can open it up to the committee. We'll take John Capon, Freddie Escobar, and Don Frazier. Please, yes. Morning.
How are you folks?
Morning. Fantastic. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Let me introduce myself. My name is John Capon. Currently, I'm a Captain 2 Commander of Urban Surge and Rescue Task Force at Fire Station 85. I speak before you today because we are in dire need of leadership. We are in dire need of resource. And I'm going to ask you guys here today, you guys are here for public safety. If you're that concerned about your public safety, I'm going to ask you, each and every one of you tonight, to go home and take your seatbelt off and drive around your city and see how safe you're going to be. Our fire department is proposing to take men and women off my task force and to supplement it and put them on ambulance. I've been a paramedic for over 30 years. I've saved lives. I've been there when people can't get out of the houses and homes. That fireman you're taking off the rig, he's the one that cuts us in to get into that house, to grab that person, to find that person in that bedroom. He's the person that gets me out when I'm in there to cut the windows, the bars, and the security that people have put on their homes. We don't have single-family dwellings out there, folks. We have multi-family dwellings. And we have people out there that need our safety. If you think 11 ambulances are enough, they aren't. They sit in the hospital for hours. I sit every day sitting on the sidewalk waiting for an ambulance. I'm a paramedic. I provide the best possible care. If you guys think the public safety is important, then I ask you and urge you to urge the citizens to not wear seatbelts, because that's what you're telling me to do. You're stripping me of my safety belt, my firefighter that protects me, that protects you, that protects the public, and most of all, that's what we're here for. I have done this for years. I've served the Navy, and I'm serving you as a city. I've given up my body, soul, body parts, and everything. And this is so important. But if you allow this fire chief, who has no EMS background other than an EMT, I challenge you. Stand me next to him, and I'll tell you what, he doesn't match up. I'm a paramedic. Be very careful. And Mr. Busquiano, thank you for coming out the other day. I think you completely saw how important it was to have those people out there.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And appreciate your service to the city.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
As the other speakers, if you could go ahead and have a seat together, if you could. You don't have to wait for one. We have plenty of chairs. But again, I want to remind everyone that what was just shared by the city attorney under what we have authority over and we don't have over, we certainly could ask for a lot of information back and reports back and data, and I have a feeling this committee is going to do some of that. But we don't have the ability of a deployment, per se, from this committee anyway. But we appreciate you all coming.
Commissioners, thank you. My name is Fred Escobar, firefighter for 24-plus years, serve on the UFLAC director as your secretary. I'm here to tell you that 2 days ago, directly, I was involved in 2 injuries at a firefighter at 911 North, Bonnie Bray in District 13. The company that is proposed to be cut is Fire Station 20, to lose a man. Without that man at that incident, things would have been different. We had a firefighter that went to the burn injury, and my own firefighter fell because of lack of truck work. From a plan that was developed by the fire chief 2 years ago that came to the city council, might remind you that with his plan, nothing's going to be changed. Now he's coming back a few years later and telling us that our safety is not going to be jeopardized. It's false. There is a motion at the table for a 1, 3, 5-year plan. He was supposed to come back 60 days from December 4th to council with a plan, with various council members' signatures. That did not occur. There is no plan out here because there isn't a plan. He didn't provide a plan at Fire Commission. He's not providing a plan today. The safety of our members every single day will be in jeopardy. There's no ifs and ands about it. I challenge anyone behind me, and I haven't even looked over my shoulder. I'm a subject matter expert in truck work. 20 out of the 24 years I've been assigned to the truck. I understand what each member needs to do and how they do it. I was a trainer. I've since then promoted. Now I'm responsible for 4 members on my engine company, including myself. Well, the night when a member got hurt, as you stated, Councilmember Buscaino, and you stated, Councilmember Englander, you had to follow that member. Well, I followed my firefighter to the hospital. I had to drive my firefighter home, and all I thought about was that this fire chief, a rogue fire chief, wants to eliminate one of our personnel's force to cover his response time.
I've got it. Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for your service as well. Appreciate it coming here this morning. Mr. Frazier.
Good morning. Don Frazier. I'm a representative of the Chief Officers Association, the command staff for the Los Angeles Fire Department. I'd like to point out that we've provided you with a written document that was submitted to Fire Commission for consideration. I'd just like to make a couple of points. The Fire Department struggled in the past with response data, and they brought in experts from RAND Corporation and also from USC, and now they claim that they have perfected their data. And yet, we do not see a plan to show what this plan that the chief has is going to do to those response times. The other thing I'd like to point out is, and it's in this report, is our response is very complex. It relies on coverage, it relies on capacity, and it relies on the quality of the resources that respond. What the chief is doing is trading off capacity and quality for coverage. And it will actually have the opposite effect on the coverage part. Case in point, last night, we had 3 very close-spaced incidents, one in Watts, one in the Crenshaw area, and one in Hollywood, that took our fire resources down right at capacity. So we had no units left over for coverage. With this plan, we would require more resources to be dispatched to provide the on-scene staffing that's required by those incidents, and we would actually have holes in coverage as a result of that. I ask you to be very considerate as you look at his plan. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. And the final 2 cards on this item were Mr. Andy Fox and Frank Lima. We had some cards submitted after we started the item, and then I stated when we opened the item up that if you didn't have cards submitted at that time, that we wouldn't be accepting any more cards. And so for those of you who had submitted them after I made that statement or might not have been in the room, your cards will be on record that you submitted a card, and it will be part of the council file index.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Andy Fox, I'm Assistant Chief with the Los Angeles Fire Department and President of the Chief Officers Association. We're here to bring to the committee's attention a very grave concern over the current proposal to reconfigure and redeploy the fire department. I want this committee to recognize that this is not new territory, that your body has actually dealt with this issue. I think Mr. Zine may recall when a prior fire chief proposed the exact same deployment for the exact same reasons, to deploy additional BLS rescues, and that in fact happened about 10 years ago. I also want to point out to this committee that your colleagues, ironically Councilmember Garcetti and Councilmember Gruhl, both forwarded motions, and those positions were restored over the subsequent years. And they cite in their motions firefighter safety, NFPA standards, and public safety. It would be a shame for this council to allow that mistake to happen again, and make no mistake about it, you'll go back, and just like Mr. Garcetti and Mrs. Gruhl, you'll end up restoring those resources, because it is a public safety issue. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when either a member of the public is compromised or one of our firefighters. We have an issue with really the process to start with. The chief has provided a single-page document on a complete redeployment of half the city's fire apparatus. We think that is irresponsible. At the Fire Commission, we generally have a board report
which is required with thorough analysis. The department, for some reason, has been unwilling to bring forward that report. They indicate the report will come some 2 weeks after implementation of this program, and it will provide the analysis that we've all been asking for. The chief today was quoted in the LA Times as saying somehow if the city council gave him the money, he would withdraw this plan, somehow implying that the city council is responsible for this and in some way not the department's deployment plan. I have a copy of the budget, the department's budget. It's my understanding that there was no request for 11 additional BLS ambulances. There was no request for EMTs.
Just to be fair to the other
So
members.
we think that this plan is ill-advised. We believe that it is a firefighter safety issue. And more importantly, we think we can work in collaboration with the department to come up with a plan that does match our mission today, but does not compromise firefighter safety.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman, honorable committee. Nice to sit here with our brother chief officers. We're making history here. I'm Frank Lima, president of United Firefighters, and we're not sitting here before you with a contract, with politics, pension issues. We're here for firefighter safety, for public safety. We do not oppose opening ambulances, by no means. These are not paramedic ambulances. Remember, where's the restoration plan? This was the chief's plan 2 years ago when he sold it to council and said, response times won't go up, and this is what it's all about. We are not working on a platform of a fully staffed fire department. We're working on a 20% cut in services. Now we're cutting through the bone. It's how it's being done. Stealing 1/3 of my firefighters off of the truck company. Make no mistake, there's 3 firefighters on the truck company, and 33% of them will be taken. This has been inadequately vetted. It's like the general manager for animal services. I could do whatever I want. He's putting politics over safety. His own chief officers are not behind him on this. The fire chief is leading alone with nobody following him. Safety of firefighters will be in jeopardy, and it sickens me to hear his comment about the national standards, because I'm the only one in this fire department in the city. I actually sit as a principal member on National Fire Protection Association's 1710 committee, and he's being very disingenuous about adding the engineer as the 5th firefighter. It's like having 2 cops ride in a cop car for safety factor. Nobody can argue that this will make it less safe for a firefighter. Our Chief Rueda has mentioned, hey, we're getting lucky out there. This is the most hazardous profession, and firefighters die, but we need to have our electeds give us better odds at what we do. Nobody dies on medical calls, and let me just finish with, a firefighter fatality or serious injury will happen, and UFLAC will not have our fingerprints on it. This will be solely on the fire chief's shoulders and those who sit by quietly and condone it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, gentlemen, coming in. If we can have the department come back to the table with the chief, open it up for some questions. Mr. Sinai, do you have any questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it's also.
Start with you. I've got several. But yeah. I'm sorry.
My bad.
I realize that.
I know downstairs.
If somebody can notify downstairs, I'm sure they're having
Steve, are you up here to get the council people?
I'm sure they're having presentations this morning. If they can start with some of the presentations and let the president know, we'll be down. Do any of my colleagues have any presentations this morning?
I don't think so. Thank you. I figured the sergeant arm's up here for that purpose. Okay, I have a series of questions that relate to this. Number one, I don't think it's safe. I don't think it's effective. I don't support it. I'll go on the record saying I don't support it. A variety of reasons. You talk about car crashes, fires. When car crashes occur, you need to have people get the people out of the car. I think you probably go to more car crashes and the paramedic calls that go as a result of car crashes, since we seem to have more car crashes than we have fires taking place, and you need the firefighters there to rescue the folks out of it. When you talk about the BLS, the basic life support, can they give any medicine? Can they give any IVs? Can they do anything to treat that person other than putting them on the gurney?
Your first question about we go to more car crashes, that's a very good point, Councilman. So now we have that car crash in a fire station district, and that light force that we need to respond is tied up on an emergency medical service call. By putting a BLS ambulance in that district, that ambulance takes that EMS call, and guess what? That light force is available to actually respond to that car crash, and they can actually do that forcible entry. So that's what this plan does. It makes fire resources available to respond to fire calls and those extrication calls. And the premise being that 5 people showing up on that light force for that call and being available to is better than having 6 people tied up on the EMS call and having to bring someone from a further away district. Okay? We're sending the appropriate resource, that ambulance.
But I noticed, I don't want to debate the issue, but I know when someone's trapped in a car, you got to get them out, and then you got to treat them. So I've seen that situation.
Correct.
From my experiences. Also, hospitals, I've seen many times when the paramedics are sitting at a hospital with a patient, and they've been waiting for a long time to try and get that person admitted to that hospital.
That's another one to make my point. Thank you very much. Those paramedic ambulances are tied up in the ERs with those basic life support patients. So with 33% more BLS ambulances transporting to the hospital, it keeps those paramedic ambulances available to respond to those critical calls.
But the question is for you as the fire chief, what are you doing with the hospitals to try and inform them of how they're...
Sir, we're constantly educate the hospitals when we have extended wait times. We have our EMS supervision respond out to the hospitals. We're working with the state and Dr. Bachter in the state to look at the problem as a system-wide issue. So I unfortunately can't control the hospitals.
No, I know you can't control them, but somehow I've seen an inordinate number of time when the paramedics are sitting there with a patient.
I agree with you 100%.
And that ties up that paramedic.
Yes, it does, sir. It is an
Also,
incident for us.
education of the public. We know that the calls are going up 84% as you list. Education of the public to use urgent care centers. Have we done any education to tell these folks there's other alternatives than to call 911 and have a paramedic unit
Yes, we do.
respond to their situation?
We work with public health to make sure we do that education, but again, when we get the call for service, sir, we respond. We transport the patient. We provide education, but we'll always respond and transport.
And I will tell you my experience here in 12 years on the council. I've never seen the Chief Officers Association and UFLAC, the firefighters, come together on an issue. They've always been separate. It's always been hours, wages, working conditions, et cetera. I find it interesting, and I want to make this point. I don't want to see any retaliation on these people coming forward and making this issue known to us because it's concerned us, concerned to the public. But the courage that they have stepping forward and obviously not supporting your position on this, but when you see the chief officers, which is your command staff, and the rank and file joining hands saying this doesn't work, that tells me something very, very strong. And it's not about labor issues, it's about safety for them and safety for the community. I just have a number of questions. Let me get one more. On the 10th man, there was a huge debate about getting the 10th person on the fire rigs, and it took a long time to come up to that standard because they lost them. So we're, in essence, going backwards when it comes to that issue of what they worked for in the 10th person. Is that correct?
I came in before Public Safety and the full council, and I asked for additional money so that we could staff additional resources. In 1997, 34 life forces lost the one firefighter so that we could open up basic life support ambulances. Those basic life support ambulances are still open today. Over the course of the next 9 years, the council found additional money so that we could restaff those light forces. With this deployment, with this reconfiguration, I'm requesting additional funding so that we can restaff these light forces. My commitment is to get back to that 6 people on the light forces. But for right now, the public, the 4 million people we serve every day, they need ambulances.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize this. I have a number of the questions. Mr. Chair, if we have time, I'll come back, but I know other members have questions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So essentially, from what I'm understanding, Chief, you're redeploying resources to create and support BLS units in areas that don't currently have BLS units. Is that correct?
In 9 of the 11 light force stations, there is no BLS unit. In 2 of them, there is. One, Fire Station 50 on the east side. With the current deployment, we closed a lot of the basic life support ambulances on the east side. And the other one is at Fire Station 35 in the Hollywood area. And with the nightclubs and all the activity and construction going on in Hollywood, we get extremely busy Thursdays, Friday, and Saturday nights from about 8 till morning, and we need additional BLS training.
I understand, sir, that this is all data-driven.
Yes.
And the last thing I want to do moving forward is have a threat at any single threat of burying a firefighter.
Correct.
The last thing I want.
Sir, I share that concern.
Do you have any data
about me wearing anything that goes wrong with this plan? I wear anything that goes wrong with the department ever since I took the title of fire chief.
Yes, sir. Do you have any data or expectations that show this won't impact fire safety in areas that will be losing a firefighter for this program?
Sir, safety is a primary consideration in everything that we do, and it's the responsibility of all of our members, all of our officers, and all of our chief officers. This is an inherently risky profession, as Labor pointed out. No, I can't give you any guarantees that today something tragic won't happen to a firefighter.
I understand that, but you don't have, and you're saying you don't have data.
What I can say is that NFPA says that you need 5 members on a truck company. We will have 5 members on a truck company.
I had an opportunity, as I share in this committee, colleagues, of spending time with the firefighters throughout my district, most recently in 85s. And this is personal for me. I've spent 15 years answering radio calls with my brothers and sister firefighters. If there's any threat at all of any firefighter safety issues, I'm not going to support anything that comes before this committee, and I'm going to be on record as well. And I know we don't have much authority, but this is the discretion of the fire chief to deploy as necessary. And at the same time, we're asking them to look at the numbers and redeploy based on the numbers. But for me, when you look at a threat of, again, and we've done this before, and I understand there was a fire captain that lost his life.
Not directly related to this at all.
Okay.
You have anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I'll go on record and say that I have serious concern. I'd like to see the data coming back to this committee as soon as data is available. I agree with a lot of the comments that were made on a one-page plan. I think we have to have confidence in the chiefs that we put in the position. I've got confidence in you, Chief, as I've indicated in my last Public Safety Committee, with a lot of the good things that are happening with the department, quite frankly, with FireStat and moving those efforts forward. I applaud the department in the fact that this is not a matter from our perspective and where we're sitting and what we have control over under the charter as elected officials in terms of policy and budget. This really boils down to a budgetary issue. So we've got the budget chair here, and you've got 3 LAPD reserve officers here as well, your partners in law enforcement. And I don't think you could really be better represented, quite frankly, on this committee with the budget chair and law enforcement and the vice chair of budget here as well as the chairman of this committee. I plan on asking a lot of questions through the budget process on this as well. That's really where the discussion needs to take place, is a budgetary function. We have some restoration in the budget, some, up to about $35 million. We'll discuss how that'll be deployed. We also have an RFP on the street right now that's going to really rip apart all of these functions. It's going to give a seat at the table in the RFP, not just from the city and the CAO from a budgetary and policy perspective and deployment, but also with the chief's office and with both the Chief Officers Association and with UFLAC, which I think is critically important. So we could really get into the weeds of what's going to happen in the next several months. I understand this is a pilot program. I'm not on board. I have concern and reservation as well, so we'll continue to monitor and ask the department to continue to report back on those items. Hopefully the Fire Commission gets into the weeds under their jurisdiction much more because they have the ability to do that, and you're responsive to them, and I appreciate that as well. We'll continue the dialogue with both the Fire Chiefs Association as well as UFLAC. But with that, this really, from our perspective, is we need to give you more money. And we continue to talk about that and figure out where that money should and how it should be spent. That'll also be part of the RFP. They'll both be coming back to the Budget and Finance Committee and Public Safety, so we can have those conversations. Which we really need to do is, what are we going to do, not just to get through the next 3 or 4 months, not just to blow up this plan and figure out what kind of problems or lives might be at risk or concern for public safety, but what are we going to do to restore the fire department back to full functionality? What are we going to do to make sure that you have the equipment, the resources, the boots on the ground, enough staffing? That's really the big picture. That's really what we're talking about. Not these knee-jerk reaction, quick fixes because you don't have the resources and you have to do what you have to do to respond to the data, to respond to public safety. Certainly our folks representing the men and women of the department and the entire rank and file have to take a position of public safety for their folks as well. So we all get that. But at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is we have to dig deep to ensure we're restoring the department to full functionality and ensuring that we're giving you those resources. And that's what I'll continue to fight for in the Budget Committee, because that is something we have control over, and that's really what it boils down to. So,
Mr. Chair, now, you mentioned the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee is going to be convening, having hearings, et cetera.
Yes.
The budget takes effect July 1st. What do we do, Chief, between now and July 1st to maintain safety of the firefighters of the city of Los Angeles?
Sir, we deploy 11 basic life support ambulances on May 5th, and our 5-member light forces operate within our guidelines and training bulletin 76 to maintain firefighter safety. NFPA standards, which are guidelines for us, which we try to meet everywhere that we can. Just so you know, there are very few fire departments that staff 5-member trucks.
I understand that, but I know what we do in the city of Los Angeles, which is a bit different from other places in the city or in the county or the country. But my concern is, how do we permit this in good conscience to let this go forward? What authority do we have?
there's not an action item before us.
Do we do a 245 from the commission?
There's nothing to 245 because the commission chose not to put it on the agenda as an actionable item as well. So it was not scheduled, I don't believe, yesterday in their special as an action item. It was an update from the department. So there's no ability to 245 under that.
So we have any ability?
I've done all that research. So the ability we have is under the budgetary solution to look at that. We have the ability under the RFP to work with the chief's office as well as the chief directly, as well as UFLAC and the association to come up with a plan. We also have the ability, quite frankly, to urge, which I think this committee should do, is urge that while this is a pilot, that doesn't mean it's set in stone and can't change in the next month or 2 months or 2 weeks, and that you continue to work with both UFLAC and the Chief Officers Association, because they have come together collectively on this, which I applaud them for, but have that open dialogue. They have plans that they want to submit some alternatives for, so we go ahead and do that. So that'll be the action of this item that we've just heard it. And we do have, while I still have you gentlemen in the room, item 1, 2, and 11, we have speaker cards, but I believe the speaker, Arnold Sachs, is no longer in the room, so we'll go ahead and move those on consent.
Items 1 and 2 have SEER reports. You want to approve the SEER reports, Councilman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, that'll conclude Public Safety Committee of this agenda. Thank you very much.